Perhaps one of the most important, yet misunderstood parts of any forklift training program is the engineering principles of the equipment. Unless you have this knowledge, it's difficult to understand some of the safety rules relating to forklift operations, and certainly detracts from your ability to make good judgments when lifting odd-sized and difficult loads. This program focuses on some basic principles, but they are a very necessary part of professional forklift training and operations. You should learn these basic principles, and if you are unclear or have any questions, please ask your supervisor or trainer to explain them more fully and answer your questions. Another engineer principle that affects your safe lifting capacity is the center of gravity. Technically, the center of gravity is the point on an object at which all the object's weight is concentrated. For symmetrical loads, the center of gravity is at the middle of the load. Certainly, if you have a forklift unloaded, you have one center of gravity. If you have a forklift with a load, that center of gravity changes. So the entire object, in this case the forklift and load, is the concentration of weight of the forklift and load. Additionally, as you raise a load, the center of gravity shifts away from the truck and towards the forks. Forklift engineers designed the forklift with this in mind and calculated this center of gravity shift in determining the safe lifting capacities. When equipment operators exceed the safe lifting capacity and try to lift excessive loads, or if they have extended load centers and try to lift heavier loads, the center of gravity can be exceeded and the forklift will tip over towards the load. That's why tilting a load while raised can be a major safety hazard. Tilt loads only when safe to do so and necessary for positioning loads onto racks or other material handling equipment. Of course, you're changing the center of gravity even more when you tilt loads. Tilting a load changes the center of gravity, and this can be very hazardous to your safety if you exceed the maximum safe lifting capacity of your particular forklift. Moving loads upward, downward, forward, and backward causes a shift of the center of gravity and can adversely affect the vehicle's stability. The load center of a forklift is the distance measured from the center of the load to the vertical face of the forks. If you have a pallet that is 48 inches by 48 inches, and you have an evenly distributed load on this size pallet, you have a 24-inch load center. If you have an evenly distributed load on a longer-sized pallet, you no longer have a 24-inch load center. If you use attachments extending the load center, obviously the lifting capacity of the forklift can be seriously diminished. The forklift manufacturer must approve forklift attachments. This approval information must be displayed on the attachment or forklift for the attachment to be legally used on each specific forklift. We're not expecting you to remember too many technical terms, but you should be aware of some engineering definitions and how they apply to your particular forklift. First, there's the longitudinal stability. This is a fancy word that is the truck's resistance to overturning forward or rearward. This is demonstrated when you use boom attachments. Lateral stability is the truck's resistance to overturning sideways, as when using pipe attachments or extremely wide loads. Each class and size of equipment has different longitudinal and lateral stability principles, so it's up to you to remember how these affect your operation. A very short forklift would have less longitudinal stability than a very large or long forklift. Let's say you're driving a small, short forklift, and while traveling, you hit a 4-inch curb. Quite possibly, the longitudinal stability of this short forklift may cause you to overturn, whereas a large, long forklift would probably not tip over because it has much greater longitudinal stability. Lateral stability on forklifts can be viewed as wide or narrow equipment. If you have a wide-track vehicle, your lateral stability is much greater than a much narrower type forklift. This means that narrow vehicles have much less lateral stability and can tip over sideways more easily than wide-track vehicles. The term track is simply the distance between the wheels on the same axle of the truck. Wheelbase is the distance between the center line of the vehicle's front and rear wheels. Don't become confused with this terminology. Just understand the basic principles of the equipment. Let's begin with the lever principle, specifically the fulcrum principle. Technically, the fulcrum is truck's axis of rotation when it tips over. Simply stated, you have two weights balanced on a fulcrum like a playground seesaw. On the forklift, one weight is the heavy rear end or counterweight and the weight of the truck. The fulcrum point in this case is your front tires, and the other weight is the load you're carrying. The counterweight balances the load with the front tires as the fulcrum point. The counterweight is the heavy metal part of the forklift that compensates for loads and determines the proper safe lifting capacities. Never add a different or additional counterbalance to any forklift without the manufacturer's approval. By modifying the forklift, you may have significantly changed a variety of important engineering principles such as center of gravity, safe lifting capacity, maximum load height, or other unsafe conditions.
Lift truck balance can best be understood if you think of a seesaw. In diagram A, two boxes of the same weight are placed the same distance from the middle of a seesaw in perfect balance. In diagram B, one of the boxes is moved further from the center of the seesaw, disrupting the seesaw's balance and causing one box to go up. In diagram C, a heavier box is placed on one end of the seesaw, the same distance away from the center as the smaller box. This shifts the balance. The same thing can happen to a lift truck. If you try to lift a load heavier than the truck's maximum capacity, or a load that exceeds the rated load center, the back of the truck may rise off the ground and you are likely to have an accident. So be aware of the load weight and load center. Never overload your truck. On most trucks, if the center of gravity of the load is more than 24 inches, stability and capacity will be affected. As you move the weight further out on the forks, the truck may tip over. The maximum load weight a truck can safely lift is listed on the truck's capacity plate.
The ITA states that studies on forklift turnovers usually result in minor injuries if the forklift operator stays with the vehicle instead of jumping off. The normal tendency is for a person to jump downward so the driver lands on the floor or ground, usually directly in the path of the overhead guard. In a tip-over of a sit-down truck, the operator should lean away from the direction of fall to minimize injury. The most common result in a tip-over, where the operator jumps out, is a crushing injury to the head, neck, or back where the overhead guard strikes the operator. 42% of forklift fatalities are caused by the operator trying to jump from a tipping vehicle. To keep this from happening to you, always remember to keep the load as low as possible and stay with the vehicle if it tips over. Wearing your seatbelt is the best safety measure.
Here is a reminder of some safety rules to follow when operating a lift truck. You should become familiar with them from this training and from reading the operator's manual. Don't ever let anyone walk under or near your forks when they are raised. Items falling from a rack or load can easily cause personal injury. Never let anyone ride on the forks, and never allow anyone, including yourself, to reach through the mast. Moving mast parts will remove a hand or limb. Never let anyone ride with you, or allow an unauthorized person to drive your truck. This completes our overview of a lift truck operator's job and responsibilities. If you have any questions, double-check the safety rules in your operator's manual or ask your supervisor. You're on your way to being a well-trained professional lift truck operator.